welcome to this May 2020 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format allows the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity to comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcasts and meeting materials webpage. And as always, other avenues of communication with me and city councilors are available in email and voicemail. Thank you again for joining us. So we have a amended agenda. We deferred the vote. We have two votes to take, one for the city of Eugene, one for the urban renewal district related to the riverfront infrastructure investment. And so I am going to just ask Councilor Semple, Emily, would you just put that motion on the table, the first one?
I move to adopt Resolution 5293, adopting a supplemental budget, making appropriations for the City of Eugene for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2019 and ending June 30, 2020.
Second.
Any need for discussion on this item? We've been over it quite a bit. Councilor Syret. Yes. Claire.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to take a minute. I apologize I wasn't able to attend our work session on Monday. So I'm going to vote in favor of this item. And I had mentioned at a prior work session, I had a few things to say. I really feel like we need to move forward on this phase of the development and continue with our plans here. These have been a long time in process, and we can't have another long time vacant piece of property downtown. We all remember the pits, and we don't want this to be an equivalent situation. We haven't lost our partners in this project yet. And I think staff is simply doing their due diligence to let us know when they talk about that as a possibility, doing their due diligence to let us know, there are uncertainties that weren't present before, but it's still a prime piece of real estate. And by building infrastructure there, we will increase its value and increase its attraction to potential developers, including our current partners. And I think it's just a change in how we are sharing the costs. Ultimately, the developer will, according to my understanding of staff's presentation, we will recoup the cost of some part of the cost of that infrastructure through the sale of the parcels. And the new park will need activity in it to ensure that it's not misused or abused and until there's an actual neighborhood there. And with the recession we're facing, I think, borrowing costs are very low. Cost for the construction bid came in much lower than expected. So I think it's really actually a good opportunity for us to use public funds to create economic activity and generate further economic activity down the road. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you. And Mike, you want to comment?
Thank you, Mayor. Only because I had two or three constituents that sent me notes about, how in the world can you be spending money on something like this at a time like this? And I would say to those folks and anyone else with similar concerns that these monies come predominantly from the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, which is geographically constrained, and there are monies that we can only spend on projects in these areas. And thus, to me, it makes a good deal of sense. So as that's the only place that we can't spend it on other things if we want to. So this does provide, as Claire listed, several public benefits. I'm entirely in favor of it. So just wanted to say that.
Okay. Thank you. All right, if there are no other comments, we're ready for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand really or virtually? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All opposed? 2. All right, so that passes. Thank you very much. That's great. And now I am closing this meeting of the City Council and opening the meeting of the Eugene Urban Renewal Agency.
I think Councilor Evans, oh, maybe that was his vote.
That was his vote. He voted both ways. I did not count him twice.
Nice try, though.
All right, Emily, you want to put this second resolution on the table?
I move to adopt resolution 1093, adopting a supplemental budget, making appropriations for the Urban Renewal Agency of the City of Eugene for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2019 and ending June 30, 2020.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 opposed. 2, and that passes again. So thank you very, very much, everyone, for that. Okay, now I'm adjourning the Urban Renewal Agency and reconvene the Eugene City Council for our first agenda item, report back on city policy regarding short-term rentals. So I will turn this over to the city manager. You're still muted.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before we jump into that, I just wanted to give a really quick reminder. We are going to change format a little bit on your COVID-19 updates. And so today you got an email from Laura Hammond that has a video, a YouTube link that was done today by the chief, giving you a full update on where we're at. And it will also allow you at the end of that to reach out to him or to me with any questions you might have. We're going to try to do that a little bit and mix it up so that we're not spending as much time in work sessions. I also wanted to just share on that same note, the emergency declaration will expire before you're back in session again. And I don't need you to vote on that. I can just inform you that I intend to stay in step with Springfield and Lane County and move forward with that while you're off. So if you have time at the end and you want to vote on it, you can, but it's not necessary. So the short-term rental piece, you know, I'm glad Lydia, I think, has a short presentation that she's going to give you. And I just wanted to give a reminder, especially for those that are listening out there, that the options and the motions and the city manager's recommendation was not intended to be a reflection of this is a recommendation of the committee. It's actually my recommendation based on how I've been getting feedback and listening and learning about the process. So I'll let Lydia do her short piece and then we'll look forward to your discussion.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, Mayor and Council. I am Lydia Kay with the Building and Permit Services Division. And as Sarah mentioned today, I'll briefly go over the process to date on the city's discussion on short-term rentals or STRs. I'll go over the process working with the short-term rental ad hoc committee and address some issues that have been raised in testimony submitting to council recently regarding this topic. Staff is here today requesting direction from the city council on next steps on the process and direction on regulating short-term rentals in Eugene. The city council had requested a work session asking for information on how other cities regulate short-term rentals, and staff first came before this body on September 23rd, 2019 with that information. At that meeting, the council directed staff to draft an ordinance with proposed short-term rental regulations. Prior to the December 11th, 2000 meeting, when staff returned to discuss the proposed ordinance, several short-term rental owner-operators came before council and raised concerns that there hadn't been a public process prior to drafting this ordinance. Council requested that the process slow down and directed staff to create an ad hoc committee to make recommendations to city staff regarding implementation of city policy regarding short-term rentals. A 16-member committee was formed representing various perspectives on short-term rentals. 5 committee members are short-term rental owner-operators, 5 represent impacted neighbors, 4 are housing advocates, plus we have a representative from Travel Lane County and a representative from the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association. The committee first met in late January to share perspectives and provide feedback on a survey and open house. The open house was held on February 11th and was well attended. A survey, which was designed to provide additional ways for the community to share their perspectives, was held open through the month of February. This wasn't designed as a scientific survey. Comments from the open house and survey responses were provided in your packet. The second committee meeting was held on March 3rd to group the variety of issues raised through committee discussions, the open house, and the survey. These were prioritized by a dot exercise conducted by the committee. A third meeting was scheduled in late March but had to be postponed due to the emerging COVID crisis. During this pause, council again heard, primarily from short-term rental owners and operators at a public forum, many calling for a pause on the regulatory discussion as the short-term rental industry, like many others, was significantly impacted by the COVID crisis. Many STRs are local small businesses who are suffering from a loss of revenue at this time. Staff held a third meeting via Zoom on May 7th to receive feedback from the committee on potential next steps for the council. These options we discussed were to pause the entire discussion, to move forward with a registration process, largely to collect data, or to continue working with the committee and returning at a date after summer break with draft regulations. At that Zoom meeting, there was varied interest on all these alternatives, and for some, they were interested in a combination of beginning to collect data through registration, as well as continuing work to draft regulations. However, there was not agreement on the type of data to be collected through the registration process, and some expressed concerns about privacy issues with the registration system. There were also those who continue to favor pausing the discussion entirely. There are differing points of view about whether and how to regulate short-term rentals, and those points were represented on the committee, and the discussions did become contentious at times. Some housing advocates feel that there should be no allowance for non-occupied short-term rentals in a climate where rental properties and affordable housing is in short supply. Neighbors express concerns about the impacts to livability that short-term rentals have on the neighborhood. The short-term rental owners, many of whom rely on this as a primary means of income, expressed great pride in their rentals and feel that they are providing a much-needed service for the community, supporting the economy by hiring others to assist in the management of their properties, and supporting local businesses by bringing people into the community and promoting local food and entertainment establishments. The one area where there was the most agreement was for the need to collect additional data from which to make decisions. At this time, the city does not have a registration system, and we don't have information on the number of short-term rentals, how many are owner-occupied, where they're located, etc. In recent testimony, many have indicated that the city does have a registration system because the city collects transient room tax. However, those taxes are currently collected by transient lodging intermediaries. This is Airbnb, VRBO, etc. And the data on location, ownership status, number of nights stayed, etc. are not shared with the city. There is information on registering for a certificate of authority for TRT, because when the city first began collecting the tax, the transient room tax, all short-term rental operators paid that directly to the city and did register. However, this changed in 2017 once the intermediaries began to collect and remit that tax directly to the city. I spoke with the finance department, and they have indicated that at this time, they are not aware of any short-term rentals in the city limits that do not have their taxes collected by the transient lodging intermediaries. Therefore, there is no current registration or current data for short-term rentals in Eugene. The city could adopt a registration system and collect information on the short-term rentals, where they're located, whether they're owner-occupied, how many nights stayed, etc. This information could be cross-referenced with our compliance complaint system to determine which complaints are lodged against which type of short-term rentals. While short-term rentals themselves aren't separately regulated, they do have to comply with city code, including our nuisance code, the local social host ordinance, and occupancy requirements limiting the number of people to in one single dwelling to 5 unrelated people. There's also been interest from the council in requiring a local contact to address complaints in real time, as EPD and code compliance staff cannot address complaints immediately. The council has also expressed interest in accountability. To do so, they could adopt a requirement that the license numbers would have to be posted in order to add in order to play posting. And this is an effective way to ensure that short-term rentals are licensed. Enforcement mechanisms for non-compliance could also be included. As in the previous draft ordinance, there could be a provision that an excessive number of verified complaints in a calendar year could result in license revocation. We would need to be sure that the complaints were verified, so this wouldn't be a means for frivolous complaints. Similarly, if a local contact is not available, the council could include that as a trigger for license revocation. As I mentioned at the start, staff are looking to council for next steps on the STR process and what, if anything, should be regulated. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have a lineup. We have Claire, Jennifer, Betty, Alan, Greg. So Claire, kick it off.
Thanks.
Mine's on there too, Mayor. I'm sorry.
Yeah, God. Oh, sorry. And yes.
Sorry, I just lost my screen. Okay. Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, staff, for the report. So I have a number of thoughts. First, I think we should, depending on which motion we adopt, I think we should disband the ad hoc committee. I feel like it's played out its purpose to a limited extent. I think the city manager and staff can find more effective ways to gather information we require for further regulations later in this year or early next year. I want to say I never intended this committee to make recommendations to us about what regulations we should adopt, nor did I expect there to be a drive to reach consensus amongst the committee members. It really was to be a clearinghouse to understand how the potential regulations we might impose would affect these owner operators. So that was really what I was hoping to get out of it. I think that has been accomplished, and I also think we've heard from individual owner operators as well as community members about it. So I feel like the ad hoc committee isn't really going to serve a very useful purpose going forward. I also want to just say I think this type of rental does provide a value in our community. Hotels cannot offer the same kind of accommodations that these types of rentals offer. I don't necessarily think they are in direct competition with our hotel industry. In pre-COVID times when we had football games, all the hotels in Eugene and Springfield were filled up. So there's definitely a need for further capacity in that kind of market. But I feel like these types of rentals serve other purposes. So, I work with the nurses at the local hospitals. Those hospitals often employ what are called traveler nurses who are on a 3-month contract. They need a place to live. They don't necessarily want to rent an apartment or live in a hotel during that time. Nor do I think we're in danger of having so many of these kinds of rentals that they are having any significant impact on our long-term rental or housing market. I think it is negligible. And I don't think we can assume that if we were to tighten up the regulation so much that people stopped offering short-term rentals, they would automatically become long-term rentals or sell those homes onto the housing market. So, and I want to just reiterate at the very beginning, the first work session we had on this, I took the position that I would be comfortable with imposing regulations on this type of business that are very similar to what we impose on hotels and motels. So I feel like a registration, a licensing regime makes a lot of sense, allows us to collect data. We could do that for a certain amount of time. And I would trust the city manager to figure out with staff what that should look like. So those are my thoughts and where I'd like to see this go. Thanks.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Lydia, for kind of summarizing where we've been and where we are. I know there's a lot of disagreement, but it seems like what you said, the one thing we do agree on is we all need data that we can be confident in. So I think it's a very appropriate step to create some type of licensing program where we can spend a good deal of time getting that data that we can be confident in is accurate and gives us a clear picture of what is going on in our community. I agree with Claire. I think that the committee, while maybe didn't do exactly what we thought, did serve a purpose, and it's probably time to move on. And if we need that type of feedback again, we can, make that decision at that time.
Good. Thank you.
The last question I had, Lydia, you mentioned a system for complaints to revoke licenses, and my only concern with that is that we were told that staff is kind of at capacity, and whether they would actually, like, if that's a reasonable thing to be able to ask staff to check on all these complaints and be able to verify them.
Thank you, Councilor Ye. It's true that our code compliance staff is at capacity. It depends, if there was a desire from council to have a robust way of managing short-term rentals, what a lot of other communities do is they have a small yearly fee, and that could fund a part of a position that could help specifically address those type of complaints, specific short-term rentals. At this time, we're thinking that if we do move forward, if the council wants to move forward with the registration system, we would propose that we could absorb that cost at least for the first year, and that way we can collect that data, we can see the types of complaints that are being generated, and we can get an idea of how much time that those would take to respond to, and then we could really be informed about, if we needed a fee, exactly what it would need to cover.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure we're not asking of staff something that they really can't deliver. I know that would probably be very frustrating, and it sounds like you have a plan for that, so that's great. And thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Betty.
Thank you.
Betty, microphone.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
That's great.
Okay. I think staff did a good job before our work session, whatever that was, months ago. And I strongly favor going ahead with a hearing on the ordinance, which was presented at that time, and changing some things if necessary. I think we don't need to wait till there's a big problem. That's what we do too often in this community. I think we can learn from other communities who have had huge problems with short-term rentals, because Hood River is one example, and as I pointed out to everybody a long time ago, there was an article in the New Yorker about it. Bend has had, a lot of communities have taken steps to prevent problems. Unfortunately, some of the short-term rental people circulated misinformation so that people who are just renting a room or two in their home thought that we were thinking about banning that. That was never the intention of anyone, I think. If it's owner occupied, the people live there and they have a big house and want to rent a couple of rooms, that is not something that we should be considering getting rid of. But a business in a neighborhood, we have zoning laws against people operating businesses in neighborhoods. As someone said, hotels do not belong in neighborhoods. someone said she's tired of looking at roller bags going up and down her street, roller luggage. It's not the right place for them, for a total hotel. I know one person who wanted to have a business in Eugene and couldn't because of zoning. But these people are just established buying houses to have a business. I think the time to act is before. Now we're hearing mainly from people who are making money from their short-term rentals. Some of them who are misinformed and think that they can't continue to rent a room in their house, but some who are depending on this for their total income. If we go ahead with a hearing on the ordinance, which was well prepared by staff, we can hear more from other people rather than just people who have a vested interest. And I strongly urge us to go ahead with a public hearing and then make a decision and have another work session. But I don't think we should drag it out with big events coming to town. There will be more incentive for people to go into this kind of business. And I see I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I agree that the ad hoc committee has served its purpose and that it should be disbanded. I'm okay with a license and data, but at this time, correct me if I'm wrong, there is no registration fee. It's just, correct?
Well, we don't have a program yet, so we could establish a fee if that is the council's.
Okay, so this is just registration and data collection proposal. What about the TRT compliance? How do we're going to collect data about that? How do we ensure compliance of that?
Well, when I spoke with the finance department, they felt that we actually had a pretty good handle on the TRT compliance. You know, again, it would allow us, if we had the data of how many short-term rentals there are in Eugene, we actually would be able to look at the amount of money that's being provided to us by the platforms and see if there's a big discrepancy in how many short-term rentals there are compared with how much tax is being collected. So actually having a registration system would allow us to be able to make sure those two things measure up. And then if there was a big discrepancy, we could look into doing some research to see where there was a gap.
I recall Portland looking at this and their number of compliance was startlingly low. I think like in the 20-30% of people were paying the TRT that they thought were out there. Why would we be different?
I don't know. Again, I don't know if that has changed in the city of Portland. I remember as well. I know that Portland has moved to have some requirements through the platforms, and I think that was one of the things that they're trying to address. So again, I think the registration would allow us to be able to see if we are in fact collecting the TRT from all of the short-term rental properties that would be licensed if we had a license program.
And so what if people just decide they're not going to register?
Well, and that's why I suggested that one thing that we could do, and one thing that other communities have done, is require that in order to have your property advertised on Airbnb or VRBO, that those platforms actually would require that license number in order for them to register. So that would be a pretty big motivator, again, considering that according to the finance department, everybody goes through those platforms. They would need to, the platforms have actually done that in other communities. And I met with a representative from VRBO or Verbo, and they indicated that they would be in support of doing that, of requiring that license be posted and that they have that number verified with the city in order to be able to advertise with them.
And there are folks that are not on VRBO or Airbnb. What about them?
Well, again, according to finance, and this is maybe different outside of the city limits, we're of course only talking in city limits, but it sounds like majority, if not all, according to finance, the short-term rentals in Eugene do go through that. Now, you know, there isn't a way for us to stop somebody who wants to post an advertisement on Craigslist or something like that for renting a room or renting their house. If we had a robust system where compliance staff could actually go through those types of advertisements and see if people were advertising that we weren't collecting the data, that would be something that we could do if we wanted to get into that fine grain of enforcement. That, of course, requires some staff resources, but we could do that.
Right, but we're not really enforcing anything except for maybe through the Airbnb VRBO license number requirement. You know, one of the things that the motion doesn't have in it, I was thinking about and wanted from the very beginning, was some kind of accountability mechanism. It's not explicit in the motion, but you talked a little bit about that. Maybe you can explain a little bit where that's going, because it's not many, it's just a few bad apples. 99% of people do this right and have great Airbnbs and VRBOs, but it's the small group though that spoil the whole bunch. And it's that reason we are actually having this conversations, because those got to be such an issue that they needed to be dealt with. And if I'll point to some of the data that came out of the survey on question 8, which is on page 26 of our agenda packet. It was about a third asked if your experience addressed sufficiently through communication. About a third no, a third yes, and a third don't know. So like 2/3 of the people felt like their issues weren't addressed because there's not really a good way to do it. And then question 7, you know, here's the laundry list of ways to do it, which means there's a laundry list of ways to do it, and yet people aren't able to get their complaints dealt with, and the ones that go through Airbnb and VRBO are worthless compared to what most people tell me. The social host ordinance, great for parties around the UVO, but it has specific or violations which probably aren't going to be here. So complaint system and accountability mechanism in here built into it. The existing system doesn't work. It's like we're not doing anything. So I think we do need to institute that. Waiting a whole year to get data, well, we'll just be a year behind and we'll still have the same exact problem, but in spades, because we'll have, like Betty said, all these big events coming to town. So if you could address the accountability mechanism, that would be great.
So do you mean accountability in terms of making sure that people are following the rules and regulations?
Correct, yeah. So, you know, doing a noise complaint or other kinds of mechanisms doesn't seem to be working at all. And our code enforcement's completely booked up.
Right, right. Well, again, if the council was interested, we could expand the size of our team by having a registration fee that would allow us to have more staff to respond directly to those complaints. And I think if we were going to be fully able to enforce that, that is something that we would need to look at. Again, I think that is why a lot of communities do have the option of having a local host. And it's somebody who can be available within a very short period of time, an hour or so. Neighbors would have somebody to call that could respond immediately and not have, you know, on the weekends, code compliance staff isn't available. EPD is obviously called out to many types of issues. So that is a way that the neighbors would have somebody who could respond to the complaints immediately. And again, the idea of having some kind of a penalty. So if there are a number of verified complaints, that you could lose your license for a year or whatever period
exactly
the council thinks is appropriate. Similarly, if the local host number was posted, but there wasn't anybody at that number, or they weren't responsive to the complaint, and again, we'd want to make sure we verified that. But that could be another reason if the council wanted, they could revoke, like we could have the system revoke a license if you don't have a local host that responds to those complaints in real time.
But none of that's in here now.
Well, no, and we don't have a draft ordinance before you now. The ordinance that we have is the one that we presented several months ago. So based on what directs us, we'd be happy to provide that in an ordinance and bring that back to you for your consideration.
I'll need a round two, Mayor. You're on mute, Mayor.
Greg, you're up.
Thanks, Mayor. I've got, let me say this first. I'm with Claire and Alan on disbanding this committee. It doesn't seem to have worked. There's a lot of complaints. There's complaints about the composition of the committee. How many, people from the hotel industry are represented versus, the short-term rental folks. So I think that's a good move for us. Here's question number one. If we were to develop a registration system now, collect the data, and given the fact that we are at capacity in terms of our workforce in this area, how long would it take to do it? Number one, if we were to move forward with this and assign it to an individual or a team, and then number two, what would it cost for us to bring on an additional employee that will be dedicated towards enforcement of an ordinance that we may pass at some point in time? What would the salary be? Would it be full-time? Would it be part-time? What are the other personnel expenses that would be wrapped up into that? And, would we be able to set a reasonable fee that would cover, that individual that would be doing that work?
Lydia, I'm going to jump in here real quick. So you can answer that question too. Because we've been talking a lot about our staff being at capacity. And I think, livability concerns in Eugene have always been an issue and important. And so we've always tried to keep up with that. And so I just want to remind you, remind everyone, this is not a new program. People have been doing short-term rentals for several years. And I've asked staff, have we seen a significant uptick in our complaints? And we have not seen a significant uptick in our complaints. So I don't think that what's going to happen with this is that we're going to get a surge of complaints. I think what we're going to be able to do is fact verify how many of the existing complaints we're getting are actually related to short-term rentals or long-term rentals or actually home ownership, which that helps. But I think, if we can get you the numbers on what we think the staff would cost. Lydia probably just needs a little bit of time to tell you what those loaded positions are. But I just wanted to throw that out there as a starting point.
And thank you for that. And I think in terms of getting something up that we could start collecting data, if there was a registration system, we would be able to absorb just that data collection and gathering that information within the current system. I mean, we do have some folks who work in our business license program who aren't the code compliance staff, and they could help us out with that. And so they might have some more capacity. They're not going out on the complaints specifically.
Lydia, do you know how much time that would take for us to assign someone to that task, collect the data, develop, the program if we're doing a program? What would be the timeline on that with your current staffing?
I guess I'm not 100% clear. I understand the question. I mean, if we adopted an ordinance, how long would it take us to start collecting the data? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think we could do that relatively quickly because, again, we have existing programs, business license programs, rental housing programs that we can make pretty simple modifications to those systems to start collecting the data. If it's just about data collection, I think we could come back and provide a report to the council within, 4 to 6 months and have some data on what the situation is in the community. the one thing I think is important for us to remember is that because of this COVID environment, there actually has been quite a downturn, as we've heard from the owner operators. And so there are fewer people who are using short-term rentals. So I think there might be less data that's out there. But in terms of collecting the data and providing a report to council, that would be something that would be relatively easy to do. Like Sarah says, we have existing programs, we have existing staff who are doing some of that work. And I agree, a lot of those complaints, it's not like we're going to get a surge of new complaints. The complaints that we've been receiving, we'll be able to differentiate, are those short-term rentals, are they long-term rentals, are they homeowners, or what have you.
So basically, if we assigned a staff person to that task, it would be on a part-time basis.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That gives me clarity.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to be the fifth counselor who's spoken so far today to say it's time to disband that committee. So I hope we don't ever have to vote on that, actually, but I'm pretty sure I've heard four of my colleagues say that. And Lydia, you are awesome, and I think the world of you, but I want to disagree with the way you did the intro there. I don't believe council ever asked for public input. I believe council asked for staff to measure amongst rental owners what would be the negative impacts of the proposed ordinance. And I don't think we did that. I think we threw it too far open and caused more trouble and argument about this than was necessary. One of the things, and that's not a reflection on the job done. I think we started with the wrong mission on this is all. A lot of the discussion I'm hearing talks about people's concern or fear for what might happen were short-term rentals to proliferate with lots of events, all that. So help me out here. I'm trying to understand what actual problem that has actually happened in Eugene already that we're trying to solve. What's the complaint that has already occurred in Eugene that we're trying to fix with this?
I think your fellow counselors that wanted to bring this up could probably answer that better than I can.
Okay, it's a good point, and you're correct. There were a couple of my colleagues that did so. I don't think we've had a gigantic problem that needs this level of attention, frankly. And number two, I would ask, what specifically in any of the previously proposed ordinance or potentially considered ordinances would be addressed as a problem that we don't already have covered with nuisance code ordinances? Which thing? Could Sarah or could Lydia, could you tell me what's been proposed that would be fixed that we don't already have covered with nuisance code?
Yeah, so you're asking for specific things in the ordinance that we presented you in December that aren't already on the books.
Because noise is taken care of, parking is taken care of. I mean, what isn't already covered by code that exists?
Yeah, well, for sure, the owner occupied piece, I don't think would be covered under our current code.
And also parking specific to short-term rentals isn't currently covered in our rules, right? There's a requirement that every single family dwelling provide one parking space. Right. But there is a provision for if you have additional people at your home.
Okay, but we do for illegal parking, we do have code for that already for people who are parking illegally. Yes?
Yeah, that is correct.
I don't think this rises to the level of energy we've put towards it as a problem. I really don't. I think we should be solving other problems first, number one. And number two, the folks who own locally, the vast majority are local residents trying to earn extra money by being able to provide something that is dramatically down right now. There's no large scale events, there's no travel. So these folks are already losing all kinds of money on something they need. Local residents are hurting. And I think it's the worst possible time for us to kick them while they're down. So I'm not in favor of moving anything forward.
Okay, I have Chris up next.
Thank you. I really like the tenor of the conversation we've had so far, and I think in distilling it, I'm hearing there's kind of two conversations that are getting intermingled sometimes, but to me, there's still two parts that can be dealt with, at least in the short term. And the first one is, what do we need to put in place with regard to short-term rentals? And I'm of the mind that I don't have enough data to do anything that's too impactful or too long-term. So I would want to put in place a registration system so we can begin to collect information. It sounds like there's enough assurance in there that we can make that compliant or figure out mechanisms to make it compliant. So I think at the very least, that's what we should do, is get started with a registration, licensing, tracking system so we know what we're dealing with to make longer term decisions. The second one, which Alan brought up and others have mentioned, is what are we doing to ensure that it doesn't create a nuisance? Because it's really an enforcement question, just like many of the other issues we deal with, fireworks and loudness and barking dogs and everything. These are all nuisance enforcement issues. And I don't want to single out a short-term rental as somehow being unique in terms of its nuisance potential versus any other kind of a rental or even a home. I have homes in my area that have nuisances. And so I want us to be assured that we have a robust nuisance enforcement system, which will not only pick up renters and homeowners, but also STRs along the way. So we don't have to single somebody out. We just have a robust system in general. A lot of the complaints I get are nuisance complaints, regardless of whether it's an STR or not. So whatever we can do to make our nuisance enforcement system and mechanisms will not only sweep up the STRs that are, like Alan says, the few violators, but we'll get the other ones as well. And I think that will create huge goodwill in the community because right now that's where people feel we're falling down, is we're not doing that nuisance part. So Alan's right, but he's right in a small sense of what really is a larger need that we need to have. And it's not just Lydia, it's not just your problem. It's really the bigger issue of how can we be more deliberate in our ability to enforce nuisance complaints, both from STRs and from other things. And just to be clear, yeah, disband the committee. I mean, so if you're counting noses, I'm okay with that. But I would want to proceed slowly until we have more data. So I think a registration or licensing level is a good starting point so that we can begin to collect the data to make later decisions. But let's get a good enforcement system in place so we can deal with nuisances just in general.
Okay, I have Claire and Alan and Betty all needing another round. So Claire.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I appreciate all the comments. Once again, I hit the button on my screen, so I can't see anybody. Sorry.
We're still here.
We can see you.
Yes, talk without seeing you. But so, you know, at this point, I support staff implementing a registration process and gathering more information. I think we need to wait on any further regulation till we see how the current pandemic affects the landscape in this sector of our economy. As far as the comments about we don't have other businesses in neighborhoods, my tax accountant works out of his home, massage therapists work out of their home. We have lots of small businesses that operate out of residential homes in this community. I also have to say, I do not see how seeing someone walking down the sidewalk with a piece of luggage somehow has a negative harm on a neighborhood. We have a hostel in my neighborhood, and it doesn't create any negative impact. I have several short-term rentals in my neighborhood, which I didn't even know were here until those owners reached out to me when we started this discussion. Again, not seeing any negative impact. So I hear Betty and Alan saying, and I'm sure they'll speak to this again when it's their turn, that we need to fix a problem, but I'm honestly still unclear, as Mike also said, what problem we are trying to solve. If there are just a few bad apples, then we should direct the authorities we currently have to them, nuisance activities to those owner-operators, rather than rush to create a whole new ordinance to address a few bad apples. I've heard that there are people out there buying up houses to create lots of short-term rentals, but I've yet to see any actual evidence of that claim brought forward to this council. So for me, that's total hearsay. So I agree with Mike. It feels like we're taking an inordinate amount of time and energy on this matter relative to the actual negative impacts that we have been told they have. So I would like us to gather more information on the actual landscape on the ground, and a registration would allow us to do that. I think I heard staff say that that would actually help facilitate understanding which of those complaints are actually coming from active short-term rentals versus some other kind of housing situation. This pandemic is having a significant effect on this market as well as our hotel industry, and I think we should defer any larger actions until we have a better picture of those impacts.
Alan, then Betty, then Greg.
I'm a little surprised that the problem isn't clear. Maybe it is more of a location-specific thing. The Airbnbs and VRBOs around the university area. The number of complaints that I have got over the years is just astounding. So, noticed all the people that are impacted by this. You have not been heard. Please come to City Council, come to the forum, explain exactly what your problems are, and complain, because otherwise this is not going to get resolved, and it's not going to today. So the problems are noise, problems are over 5 people occupying the house. I witnessed personally one that had 14, 15 people staying out with cars all over the place. By the time the nuisance people got to it, they were gone, and it didn't make any difference. So and if you live next to one of these things, the livability concerns and the noise and the impact on your life is huge. So again, it's a few bad apples, but we don't put regulations in place because everybody complies with the rules. We put rules in place to get at the few bad apples. So what we're doing is just regulation and data collection, and that's fine, but insufficient. It's not going to change anything. The data next year is going to be sort of worthless in terms of because there's so few people doing travel and other things. So that's not going to be exactly useful data to us. So that's not going to really tell us much. So we need to have an accountability mechanism, and with fee and staff associated. It's not a full-time staff. It's probably 0.15 or something like that. But we're basically punting on dealing with all the complaints. The existing system doesn't work. It is we have all these issues. They are not resolved. Our own survey kind of indicates the same thing. So I move that we add an accountability mechanism with a fee to ensure enforcement and compliance.
So just for clarity, is this a freestanding motion, or are you adding this to the suggested option 3 motion?
I'll move option 3 with the addition of, since we haven't got a motion on the floor, I'll move option 3 with an addition of accountability mechanism and fee to ensure compliance and enforcement.
Do we have a second for that motion? Emily will second that. Okay. Okay.
And so, and just for clarity purposes, so option 3 is for folks that are listening or watching, is a move to direct the city manager to prepare an ordinance and schedule a June public hearing and July action requiring short-term rentals to obtain a license from the city, with the only license requirement being the provision of information related to the STR, such as whether or not the STR is owner occupied, and a local contact number, and the quarterly provision of information regarding rental dates, the number of night stay to each rental party, and the number of occupants per se, and including an accountability mechanism and a fee. That is the motion on the table.
And you said local contacts in there too, right?
Local contact is in there. And so, yes.
Okay, I have Betty, I know, wants to comment on this. So Betty, why don't you go ahead and speak to it? Betty, you're up.
I was looking at Alan's outline. I thought he was still there. Well, I move, if we're doing motions, I move to substitute option 2, but I wanted to speak about, it isn't just that if the short-term rentals are a nuisance, it's a nuisance. There are two things wrong, and we shouldn't wait until they happen. If they've happened, a mayor of one city told me, my children's teachers can't afford to live in this town. Too many of the houses have been bought up and used for short-term rentals, so that there's no place for people of moderate income to rent a place. This, whether it's happened, the time to act on that is before there is a problem. If we change it to owner occupied, then that takes care of it, takes care of a lot. And then some people have said to me, there's a value in knowing your neighbors and having a neighborhood. And if the neighbors aren't really living there, then they aren't your neighbors. If you have houses that are just for people coming and going, like hotels in your neighborhood. And so at least we should be limiting the number if they were, but I think the important thing is to say owner occupied, and I move to substitute option 2, requiring owner occupied, an owner occupied person.
Okay, do we have a sec?
I have one more thing to say though, but as for nuisances, we've always needed nuisance enforcement, and that's something that whether it's a short-term rental or anything, we've always needed that. Thank you.
Okay, Catherine.
So this is a motion to substitute the current motion on the table for a motion to move to direct the city manager to schedule a June public hearing and July action on the draft ordinance that was presented to council on December 11, 2019. That draft ordinance included an owner occupancy requirement. So the addition to that motion isn't necessary. So is there was there a second for that motion? I'm sorry.
No, not yet. Do we have a second for Betty's substitute motion? Okay, I don't see a second, Betty. Okay, so we're back to the original motion.
Which is the motion number 3 in your council packet with the addition of council accountability and fee.
Right, and okay. And so I have Mike, then Emily, then Greg, then Claire. So Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that there's in my mind anyway, there's a fairly dramatic difference between registering and a license that requires a fee. I understood Claire's point and agreed with nearly everything she said, which ought to frighten both Claire and I a little. That registering so we know we have some information about things is at least an interesting idea I would discuss. But creating an entirely new licensing system and hiring a new employee when, as Chris so adequately and well pointed out, we've never done a great job with nuisance code stuff citywide, and that's the actual problem, is nuisance enforcement, and it's not just with short-term rentals. So and perhaps this is geographically bound, Alan, because I do think that you're going to get a much larger complaint around nuisance issues of the sort we're talking about around the university. That makes sense. I understand that entirely. But then perhaps the actual fix is do a better job with our nuisance code, and especially around the university, and to do it for all types of housing. And I'm fine with that. Let's have that discussion. I think it would be a good one. But to create an entirely new position and to get the money from the people who are already down in the first place, rather than just ask for simple information, doesn't seem right. I just can't. Thanks.
Okay. All right, thank you. So Emily.
Thank you. I have some problems with the original ordinance. So although I also would like to move forward, I can't move forward with that. I don't know that we need a license. I think that we could charge a renewal, a registration fee. I don't know how that differs, but to cover whatever cost of implementing that. I agree that with the virus, everything is so different. So the data we get now will be applicable to during a pandemic. Will, you know, things recover in 2 years, we'll need to come back to it. Owner occupancy, I don't think any of those should be threatened. They're okay. And I don't really think people should have 9 of them. But if somebody has 1 or 2 they're not living in, I'm not sure that I want to just say, okay, you have to stop. I would want some kind of grandfathering in. The number of days it can be rented, either rent it or don't rent it. You know, it's like the grocery store can only be open 3 days a week. It doesn't make any sense to me. If people are going to make money and have people there, then do it. And yes, I think that the registration should be with the online platforms. So I couldn't vote for that unless I moved to divide, which would be a big mess. So I guess I'm for number 3, but one question is, how much would we charge them? How long before we had a check-in? And, you know, how much of a check-in? So those are questions I would want to know or talk about. Thank you.
Okay, great. Greg, you're up next.
Thanks, Mayor. I was having trouble taking myself off of mute. A couple of things. I want to direct this to our city attorney. What do we have to develop a new ordinance to deal with the issues that we're talking about? Could we amend existing ordinances that we already have on the books to address those specific issues and problems we have? And what I'm specifically talking about is the social host ordinance, which was basically developed and crafted for, kids, doing wild parties over close to the university in that area. And then, couldn't we amend one of our parking ordinances to be able to address the parking issues? Or, is it really just an enforcement deal? And then I have one other point to make. I read an article recently about Sedona, Arizona, and Sedona still has a significant problem with their short-term rentals. There are outside corporations that have come in, bought up all of the long-term rental properties, and they basically have skewed the market for people seeking, long-term rentals. So, we got people in the, in lower, part of our economy that, really can't get housing in Sedona. And, we've already got a housing crisis, or I should say a chronic condition here in Eugene. And we've been struggling to solve that. So, from that perspective, I really, I don't want to see us cut our nose, off to spite our face. The short-term rental issue triggers ramifications in other issues and problems that we have and have yet to solve. So I think we need to be very careful with what we do, if we do anything. But can we amend ordinances to address, the issues that have been outlined?
Yes, you can. I think if there are specific problems that need to be addressed and there's holes within the code, we certainly can amend our nuisance provisions. We can amend our social host provisions. We can look at the rental housing code to see if maybe that is the fit. I mean, there are a number of different ways in which we can plug some of the enforcement holes with our existing code. If we are looking for the data gathering, there's not a good mechanism to amend currently to do that. The TRT was something that was kind of looked at and discussed, but because the manner in which that is now being paid through the platforms, that doesn't give you the good data, which is why the question around, like, if we just want folks to register, does it need to be a license? And then we get into just a registration requirement. What does that look like, and how would we require someone to do it versus they have to have a license in order to operate, and the only condition of that license would be providing certain data. But then you've got some hooks, and so if they're not giving us the data, we can revoke the license. So that's why there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg when it comes to what do we want to do. If we really just want to get at the behaviors, and we're not interested in collecting a bunch of data or having a license to revoke, then looking at the code, knowing what those identified behaviors are, and looking at places in the code where we can fill that hole is absolutely a reasonable option. What I think, and I read the motion, I also want to just make sure folks know the option number 3 in the motion that's on the table was written to reflect the motion that you all made in December that directed the city manager to return and have you be able to take action on an ordinance prior to your summer break. So that is why you have a June public hearing and a July action date. As we are looking to problem solve for all of you and give you options, that becomes more challenging to get you revised documents or different ordinances. So I just want to throw that at you of why that June and July date were in there. That was reflective of your December motion that you made to act before summer break.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have Claire and then Alan again, and I'm going to have a question as well. But Claire, why don't you take it away first?
Thank you. So like Councilor Semple, I also had a lot of concerns about that original draft ordinance. I thought it was just a Christmas tree of regulation that was way out of bounds of what our actual problems might be in the community. We are not Hood River. We are not Sedona. We are not a niche community with a huge tourist influx for very specific purposes. Yes, we have the football games, but those have been part of our landscape for decades, and our community kind of knows how to address those. And I appreciate Councilor Clark's comments. My preference would be a registration system first, and then consider a licensing system with a fee and other things. But I get the sense from council there may be a desire to move a little more swiftly than where I'm thinking. So I could support the motion, even with the idea of a fee, though it needs to be something very small. And I would also support the idea of a moratorium of issuing new licenses for a certain amount of time to address this concern that, houses are being taken off the market wholesale that could be for housing. So I wouldn't want a total moratorium forever, but maybe an 18-month moratorium. So we have set up a licensing regime. We only issue for people who are currently active and want to seek that license, and then we kind of hold the ground on it for, my proposal would be 18 months. And I also would like to see the potential amendments to current ordinances that might fix, some of these problems. So this might be a little complicated, but I move to amend the motion to direct the city manager to bring back recommendations for amendments to current city code that could address the issues raised by short-term rental, including occupancy numbers and parking, and to include a moratorium on the issuing of new licenses for a period of 18 months from the implementation of the proposed license ordinance.
Second.
Okay, so just clarification. So you're adding those changes to this existing option number 3.
Correct.
Can you amend an amendment? Because there's already an amendment on the table.
Oh,
Yeah, you can.
thank you.
What is the current, I'm sorry, there's a current, Betty's failed.
Yeah, there's not an
Alan.
amendment. There's just a motion on the table.
Alan
And I
made the motion.
added to it. That's just a motion. It's not an amendment.
Yeah.
Okay, your version of the motion. Got it.
Yeah,
Everyone.
yeah.
Let Catherine speak to what this motion, what this motion says.
The second
So
withdrawal.
I think, so it's motion number 3 in your council packet, which is a June public hearing, July action on a license requirement that has an information provision requirements. It includes an enforcement ability, a fee, also direction to bring back amendments to the current city code to address issues such as parking and noise. Is that what you said? And to put a moratorium, an 18-month, parking, 18-month moratorium on issuance of new licenses. And was there a second for that?
The second withdrew because he thought it was a substitute motion and not an amendment.
Okay, but I think Emily has seconded. Emily, are you
Yeah,
seconding? Yeah, Emily has seconded.
Don't talk about myself in the third
And
person like
can
that.
I ask for a clarification on the 18 months?
Yeah, I actually want to make a comment too when you're done with your clarification.
Okay. So the 18, I will say just from a drafter standpoint, to do all of this for a June public hearing, particularly with the additions of code amendments to the current code, won't be an achievable goal. Because next week would be the deadline for the ordinance to happen. So I just want to put that out there.
So I apologize. I should have actually put that as a separate, totally separate motion. So that's not part of the ordinance. I'm just requesting the city manager to bring to this council those parts of our current ordinances that could be amended to encompass short-term rentals. It does not need to be part of this June public hearing.
Okay, so then what would be part of the June public hearing is the original motion that Alan put forward. And then what I think you're suggesting, and so I just want to make sure we're clear, is that when we come back in the fall and we actually have some data for you, that we also have, here's how you could just amend current codes as opposed to doing a whole new code. You're not asking us to start working on those codes yet. Okay, that would be my preference, is that we start to collect the data and see what the complaints are and what we could adjust.
Yeah.
And so I just want to ask, I want to follow up on that with my question, because Alan's original motion talked about accountability, but didn't define what that is. So this subsequent action is how we're going to define what that accountability might be. It could be that we're going to just amend existing ordinances, correct?
No.
Could be more. So we don't know what we're saying with that accountability exactly. We're just putting it in.
Well, I think what Alan was suggesting, that if we have a licensing regime and people are violating any city ordinance as part of operating their licensed business, the license could be revoked.
Right.
Right.
And more robust staff action to ensure that it's complied with. Yes?
Yeah.
That's what you
Right.
meant.
Right.
Alan?
Enforcement and compliance.
Yeah.
Can I ask a clarification around the 18-month moratorium?
Sure.
If we're going to, so if we put in place an ordinance that had a license requirement, we'd have to give a period of time in which folks could come in and get that license. And then so we'd have to set that period of time, however long we want to give people to come in and do that, then the moratorium would kick in. So it wouldn't be that the moratorium would lay as the program got implemented. So I don't know, Lydia, you could speak to this, like a 3-month period for folks to come in and get the license, whatever that may, I don't know what reasonable amount of time we would want, particularly in the pandemic situation where we are not operating at full capacity. We do not have staff. So Lydia, I don't know if you.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other piece that I want to be cautious about is because we don't have data on where these people are, it's hard for us to communicate with them. Now, I know that there was a group of people who gathered the short-term rental owner operators, and I certainly can reach out to them and make sure we get that information out so people are well aware that there is going to be a licensing requirement. And after the licensing requirement goes into place, that we would be putting a moratorium on issuing licenses. So I would say a minimum of 3 months, and maybe we'd want to try to add another month on there so that we can make sure to do public outreach to every possible place that we can think of, so that
it's complicated.
Has a current license.
We could also.
The language of my motion said 18 months from the implementation of the proposed ordinance. So if your implementation regime says we have a 3 or 4 month window to get people licensed, then in my mind, that would start at the end of that 4 month window. So I feel like my language is in line with what you are saying is needed in terms of practical application.
So could I suggest an alternative possibility, which could be that when we come back in the fall with some data, that we let people know you're considering a moratorium and you decide at that moment that you want to implement it or not. Because by then we will have been able to have the ordinance out there, communicated with people. We would have had several months to get people signed up, and then we'll know how many we have. And then at that point you could say, we want to start the moratorium now, 18 months from today. We can explore what other communities are doing around that. That would just be a thought.
And you keep people from spending money on it that may already have.
Should, Mayor, I'm all right with letting other people speak and then you come back to me. I'd be happy to withdraw my motion and then just restate the one about the city manager bringing back, if that's necessary. Or I could just withdraw the part about the moratorium. But I'd like to hear from other counselors first.
Okay. Let's hear from the other councilors. So I've got Alan, Mike, and Emily.
Yeah, your motion or amendment has two parts to it, Claire. The moratorium, I'm not sure that's really necessary because we basically have a COVID moratorium right now. Airbnbs and everything is just ground to a halt. And therefore, I don't think it's really necessary. I don't think this is going to grow anytime soon for the next year, which is the same problem I have with the data collection. I don't think we're going to get very good data because of the COVID moratorium on doing this. I don't think people are going to gear up and go back to where they were very fast. So the next year is going to be an aberration. So the data we're going to get is not going to be that useful, I fear. So I'm worried about that. And the second one is I totally like the idea of doing amending other things, but really it gets down to what Chris was talking about and I were talking about later, which is really about enforcement and nuisance enforcement. And maybe what we really need to do is to have a work session on how to make a more robust nuisance enforcement system. We have a very limited staff, very little budget, and a complaint-driven system. So it doesn't work very well. And it doesn't work at all if you live next to one of these things and it's a problem child. And then the final point that I'd like to make is that as far as the fee, I think it would be very minimal. So there's some folks that have done some really good research on how many Airbnbs there are, and the numbers kind of, but if there were 500 Airbnbs and you charge $25 a year, which is a very nominal amount, you'd get $12,500 a year, and that's about 20% of a person's time, or 0.2 FTE on a $65,000 person salary. So that would mean that that person could spend 8 hours a week doing this. That I think is sufficient. If there were for $25, that seems appropriate. If there were 1,000 short-term rentals, then the fee could be, like $10, $15. So I still think it's very minimal to be able to get the horsepower we need to do to move this forward. So I would encourage you to delete the moratorium part, because I don't think it's even necessary, because we've got one. But I would like to see us enhance our nuisance part and look at our other codes to be more effective in this region, because they're not now. And our own survey shows that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Sarah, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah. Well, I was remembering when we were throughout this work session that had this like suspicion that we had added a position last year. So I went back into the FY20 budget. We did add a code compliance support position last year. So our inspectors actually make more money than that, but that position is around $100,000 a year. So how you divide that out is about how you would get that. And I would just recommend that we're going to do some strategic planning with the council, I think, after we get through this budget process. And I think livability should be one of the items in light of what we're going to be facing over the next few years.
Right. Okay, great. All right. Thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Sarah about the livability point, and agree with Alan and Chris's point that are along the lines of the original thing I said, which was that this is an issue of nuisance code enforcement, and that's the problem that we're actually need to focus on fixing. I would really encourage my colleagues not to vote yes on this. What seems like a little bit of money now may not always stay that way, and it certainly isn't a little bit of money to some people. I can remember at least 3 different people who came to us during public testimony of this, talking about how their short-term rental was their only source of income. So now the city's going to take more of it from them than COVID already has. And I don't think that's fair or right under the circumstance. And as we saw with the rental housing code and the department we created that has seen the mission creep of its expanding both dollars and charge at least twice in the last 5 years, I can't help but imagine that this will have mission creep as well over time and become even more money from people. And the real problem that we have is that there are some bad actors who rent places around the university, and that there's some bad actors who rent places in and around the neighborhoods. It's the people who are doing the renting and behaving badly, in my opinion, that need to be addressed, and not the people who own the house. Although I agree that Greg is right. The social host ordinance does a good job of balancing that, and that may be the other place where we tweak here on ordinances we already have that solves this problem without needing to create a whole new system where we take money from people who don't have enough of it in the first place and create a whole new department that just creeps over time. I really hope we slow down, go back and address the actual problem, and don't vote yes.
Okay, thank you. Emily?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the moratorium because we will totally skip the trials and possibly the games too with that kind of a moratorium. Everything is up in the air. We don't know what's going on. I am concerned about the low income rentals being taken up. So that feels like, yeah, let's do a moratorium and see what happens. But at the same time, I don't know. I just find this very, very confusing as to what to do. I'm not against a $20 registration fee. I don't think that's bad. That's really cheap. I would have said $200. You're making money throughout the year. And even though it's off data, it's still be real-time data of what we're dealing with then. So I am in support of the license and a little bit of money to do it. And then looking at the moratorium and the holes in our ordinances in, you know, and maybe after break, because we have so many urgent things right now. So that's where I'm at.
All right, Claire, I'm turning this back to you to maybe revise your, and then Betty has, but
I don't know if it would be helpful, but as y'all were talking, I typed up the motion as it was originally put on the table and seconded, and also the Councilor Syrette, your amendment as I heard it, and that amendment is currently on the table. If it would be at all helpful, I can try to share my screen No?
No.
Okay.
No, I think I'm going to withdraw my motion to amend based on head nods and what I'm hearing. And so I think can wait for, on the issue of a moratorium, and I think Councilor Semple's point was well taken. You know, that would move us into the trials potentially. And, you know, I think there are some folks out there now who may have a spare bedroom they'd like to rent during that time. They're not going to be, you know, ongoing short-term rental operators, but we shouldn't preclude that, I think, from being available, because we won't have enough to house everybody when they come here for those events. So if Councilor Semple is okay with me withdrawing that motion, then I'd like to replace it, again, based on what I'm hearing. So putting the moratorium aside for the city manager to bring back to us as consideration in the future at an unspecified time. So no motion around that. But instead move the, so I have a separate motion to direct the city manager to do something that is not attached to the motion regarding the public hearing. So maybe I should wait till we vote on that motion to make my other motion.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. And I have, Betty, did you need to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. Whatever. I will be voting for this motion because it's better than nothing. It's not as much as I wanted, but I like the idea of the moratorium. I think it should happen before the trials because that's when we need it. But I did want to make a comment that we did have a work session on nuisance a few years ago, and nothing much came of it, as frequently happens. We just talk about something and then it gets forgotten. But I know I was the one who requested the work session, and it may be 6 or 7 years ago by now. And I think we ended up with the thought that there wasn't staff to take care of it. But I've always thought that we needed more nuisance enforcement. Thank you.
Okay, so I believe we are now actually ready to vote on the motion on the table. And Catherine,
can we repeat? Should somebody?
Yes, I'm going to just ask Catherine if she would review the motion that's now on the table.
Yes. Okay. So I'll read it, or I can try to share it, but I'll read it. Move to direct the city manager to prepare an ordinance and schedule a June public hearing and July action requiring short-term rentals to obtain a license from the city, with the only license requirement being the provision of information related to the STR, such as whether or not the STR is owner occupied and a local contact number, and the quarterly provision of information regarding rental dates, the number of nights stayed by each rental party, and the number of occupants per stay, and the ordinance including an enforceability mechanism and a fee to support the program.
Okay. Ready to vote? All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and opposed 1. Thank you very much. I thought that was a really excellent problem solving and discussion. So thank you for that. Really great discussion. Yes, Claire.
So I'll make this other motion, and I appreciate what Councilor Taylor said about the last work session we had, though I do think that work session did result in the increased FTE in the code enforcement office. So I do think it had an impact. But here's my new motion. Move to direct the city manager to bring back recommendations for amendments to current city code that would address the issues raised by short-term rental market, including occupancy numbers and parking, as well as recommendations for how we can make our nuisance code enforcement more robust for all aspects of enforcement of those codes at a future work session.
Second. Oh, I beat you, Chris.
Okay, it looks like Mike wants to comment on that.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I would want to add this as a friendly, if you're willing, Claire, to have that incorporate some of the other parts of the conversation, and that being with special consideration to the university area and some of the specific problems that they experience there, number one. And number two, in addition to the nuisance code, the social host ordinance that Greg mentioned, and how we could incorporate some of this into a revision of that as well. So it's
sure, I'll accept those.
Okay.
Accept those. Okay.
I was the second. One point about the social host ordinance, if you drop that, I'll accept it. But the social host ordinance does a lot more than you think it does. It has an extremely high fine, like $1,200, and then it ratchets up from there. It makes you pay for response costs by cops. It has to have 3 different misdemeanors. The social host ordinance is a good example of where a accountability mechanism that was pretty harsh that needed to be in place to handle a problem. I don't think it's appropriate to tack it on here because of the way it's structured.
Right. We weren't debating that now. I was just making the friendly that we may want to consider adding to the social host ordinance any part of this particular problem that particular existing ordinance may help solve. We may find that it will be nothing, but at least I thought Greg's idea was good.
Okay, I thought you were suggesting the social host ordinance be the mechanism for dealing with the problems.
But that there are parts there that may apply, and or that there are parts of this conversation that may apply to an.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I accept the friendly too.
Okay,
as a
Good.
second.
Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor of this, Claire's motion? Please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Excellent. Thank you. That passes. Thank you all very much. That was great work. Thank you, Catherine, for keeping us on track and knowing what we're voting for. And we are adjourned.
See you at 5:30.